U.S. sanction policy. The U.S. sanctions policy is a critical tool in American foreign policy, aimed at influencing the behavior of foreign governments, organizations, and individuals. The political mindset behind U.S. sanctions varies depending on the target nation and the specific objectives the U.S. seeks to achieve. The various key aspects of the U.S. sanctions policy mindset include: 1. National security and counterterrorism. Sanctions are often imposed to protect U.S. national security and combat terrorism. 2. Human rights and democracy promotion. The U.S. frequently uses sanctions to promote human rights and democratic values. These measures aim to pressure these governments to change their behavior and improve their human rights records. 3. Punishing aggression and territorial violations. Sanctions can also serve as a response to aggressive actions and violations of international norms. 4. Economic coercion and isolation. Economic sanctions aim to isolate and economically pressure target nations to force policy changes. 5. Countering illicit activities. Sanctions are also used to combat illicit activities such as drug trafficking, money laundering, and cybercrime. The United States has imposed sanctions on numerous countries through the Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC. Here is a list of countries currently under U.S. sanctions, including both comprehensive and targeted sanctions. 1. Afghanistan. 2. Balkans, former Yugoslavia. 3. Belarus. 4. Burma, Myanmar. 5. Central African Republic. 6. China. 7. Cuba. 8. Democratic Republic of the Congo. 9. Ethiopia. 10. Hong Kong. 11. Iran. 12. Iraq. 13. Lebanon. 14. Libya. 15. Mali. 16. Nicaragua. 17. North Korea. 18. Russia. 19. Somalia. 20. South Sudan. 21. Sudan. 22. Syria. 23. Ukraine, Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk regions. 24. Venezuela. 25. Yemen. 26. Zimbabwe. Additionally, there are specific sanctions programs targeting entities and individuals associated with certain activities or regions, such as counterterrorism, counter-narcotics, and cyber-related activities. These sanctions range from comprehensive trade embargoes, such as those on Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Syria, and specific regions of Ukraine, to more targeted measures against specific individuals and entities within other countries. As of recent data, Russia, the U.S. has imposed over 2,500 Russia-related sanctions since February 2022, primarily due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This includes sanctions on approximately 2,400 individuals and entities, and numerous vessels and aircraft. Sanctions target key sectors such as defense, finance, and energy, as well as high-ranking officials and oligarchs. Iran is heavily sanctioned by the U.S., with over 1,815 designations primarily related to its nuclear program, support for terrorism, and human rights abuses. These sanctions have been imposed over several decades and target various sectors, including finance, energy, and military. North Korea is also a major target of U.S. sanctions, aimed at curbing its nuclear weapons program and addressing human rights violations. These sanctions include restrictions on trade, finance, and specific individuals and entities involved in illicit activities. China, the U.S. has increasingly targeted Chinese entities and individuals, particularly in response to human rights abuses in Xinjiang, the crackdown on Hong Kong's autonomy, and cyber espionage. In 2022 alone, significant sanctions were placed on Chinese companies related to technology and export controls. Venezuela. Sanctions on Venezuela primarily target the Maduro regime, aiming to pressure political change and address corruption and human rights abuses. These include financial sanctions on the government and state-owned enterprises, particularly in the oil sector. U.S. sanctions have been a cornerstone of American foreign policy for decades, but their effectiveness is a subject of considerable debate. In recent few years, the debate has been marked important with following key points, like Limited impact on target regimes. Regime survival. Sanctions often fail to achieve their primary goal of regime change or significant policy shifts. For instance, despite decades of sanctions, the Castro regime in Cuba remains in power. Similarly, North Korea continues to pursue its nuclear program despite extensive international sanctions. Economic adaptation. Targeted countries frequently find ways to adapt to sanctions. Iran, for example, has developed a resistance economy, diversifying its trade partners and finding illicit means to circumvent sanctions, thereby mitigating the economic impact. Humanitarian consequences. Civilian hardship. Sanctions often disproportionately affect the civilian population rather than the political elites. In Iraq during the 1990s, comprehensive sanctions led to widespread suffering, including malnutrition and a collapse of basic services, without dislodging Saddam Hussein's regime. Public health crises. Sanctions can exacerbate public health crises by limiting access to essential medicines and medical supplies. The sanctions on Venezuela have been linked to severe shortages of food and medicine, contributing to a humanitarian crisis in the country. Geopolitical ramifications. Strengthening adversarial ties. Sanctions can drive targeted countries closer together. For instance, Russia and Iran have developed closer economic and military ties as both nations face U.S. sanctions. This can create new geopolitical alliances that oppose U.S. interests. Undermining U.S. alliances. Sanctions can strain relationships with allies who may have economic interests in the targeted countries. The extraterritorial application of U.S. sanctions, which affects foreign companies doing business with sanctioned nations, often leads to diplomatic tensions with allied nations. Ineffectiveness and evasion. Sanctions evasion. Targeted countries and entities often develop sophisticated networks to evade sanctions. North Korea, for example, has used illicit shipping practices and front companies to continue its trade despite stringent international sanctions. Limited enforcement. The sheer number and complexity of sanctions programs can overwhelm enforcement agencies, leading to gaps in implementation. This undermines the overall effectiveness of the sanctions regime. Economic costs to the U.S. Impact on U.S. businesses. Sanctions can also have adverse effects on American businesses by cutting off lucrative markets and leading to retaliatory measures from other countries. This can result in significant economic losses for U.S. companies. Global economic impact. Sanctions can disrupt global supply chains and trade, contributing to broader economic instability. This can have ripple effects that negatively impact the global economy, including American economic interests. While U.S. sanctions aim to exert pressure on rogue regimes and promote international norms, their track record shows mixed results at best. They often fail to achieve their primary objectives, impose significant humanitarian costs, strain international alliances, and lead to unintended geopolitical and economic consequences. A more nuanced approach that combines sanctions with diplomatic efforts and multilateral cooperation may be more effective in achieving long-term policy goals.